Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Countdown to Kickoff. It is Saturday, September 4th. Yes, Saturday. That means finally we've made it through the off season and we're into game week and game day today. So welcome in. Glad everybody can join us. I know that it's early in the morning, but I'm really hopeful that we can have some good preview here. Good college football talk. Good Oklahoma Sooners talk. So as you guys know, my name is Jason Ray. I've joined you for quite some time with Mark Rogers. We've went live, I believe. We've had about 19 shows, 19 or 20 shows that Mark and I have gone through. And if you're unaware, like I said, my name is Jason Ray. I work for I'm last word on college football. I've covered Oklahoma for the last 4 or 5 years. For last word on college football. So we cover a lot of things nationally over at that site. So come join us. Come join me. Oklahoma coverage all across the country. We've got the Big 12 cover. We've got the Big 10, SEC. So we've got it all. So everybody's covered. In terms of the national scene. So Saturday of college football certainly starting here at 11 with Oklahoma here in about 2 hours time. And then throughout the day at 2:30, we've got some great games with Miami and Alabama, of course. And then at 3 o'clock, we've got Louisiana and Texas. From a Big 12 perspective, at 2:30, West Virginia, Maryland is playing. Should be a kind of a sneaky good game. And then of course at 3:30, like I mentioned, Louisiana and Texas, and one of the better Big 12 games of the weekend. And then certainly at tonight at 6:30, the biggest game nationally is going to be Clemson and Georgia. So really good game there. So like I said, welcome in. This is our first Saturday of football feedback we'll watch, which we'll have later, immediately following the kickoff or immediately following the end of the game. And then obviously now we'll take you up until probably about 10 or 10:30, kind of depends on what questions we have come in. So come join us. We'll talk. What are some things that you're looking for? What are a couple of players that you're excited to see? What are some things that you'll come away from this game by seeing and say, hey, this was a really good opener. A lot of things that I'm excited about. Or what are some things that if you see that you'll be a little disappointed and say, well, maybe we're not quite as far along as I thought we were early on. So I think those are some things that we'll walk through here, at least from my perspective, and obviously want to get your perspective. And then the latter part, maybe from 10 to 10:15, 10 to 10:30, we'll kind of get your predictions, and I'll talk through what my predictions are for the game and some individuals specifically that I'm looking for to have have a really good game in this opener. So yeah, we'll do everything to get you set. Like I said, come join us, Oklahoma Football Live here, countdown to kickoff, for the voice of college football. This is the voice of Oklahoma football, but go join my man Mark Rogers as well. He's going to have everything from a national perspective, and then we've got a lot of individual team channels here, starting with Oklahoma Football Live, talking about Oklahoma. So getting everything to get you set for the game. I believe the line is still at around 31.5. It was initially 20. I believe it was 26, 25 or 26 when the game was at Tulane, but that certainly being moved to Norman gives a little bit of a home field advantage for Oklahoma. Just in terms of the field, great. I think it's just an incredibly cool gesture for Oklahoma to paint the Tulane logo on the field. It's a small, I believe it's up to each 25-yard line. That's a small one, but I think it's just a great gesture for Oklahoma welcoming not only Tulane as a football team, but their fans coming in into just a horrible situation for them, battling through another, natural disaster from a hurricane perspective. So, in terms of injuries, I know that we know the Theo Weiss thing has happened. I think initially there was a lot of scare in terms of what that looked like for him. I'd heard the ACL side of it initially. I think those reports have been refuted now, and I think it's a re-injury of the foot ankle area that he had a problem with. As you guys remember, he was out for a majority of the spring, specifically the spring game, with that. I've heard a few weeks. I don't know what a few means, if that's 2 or 3 or 3 or 4, but he'll be out for a few weeks. And I think I mean, the biggest advantage of that is you get some of these new kids an opportunity to get some playing time. I think you will see a Cody Jackson play a little bit more than what he would have. I think we'll see Jalil Farouk play a little bit more than what we would have. I think Mike Woods was already going to get a lot of playing time already. I personally thought he was going to be one of the starters outside, and certainly he is by the depth chart that came out earlier this week. But that was more solidified with him being out. So, what are some things that you're looking for? What are some kids that you're really excited to see? What are questions that you have? I think on the defensive side, on the offensive side, that's the only injury. I've heard some things about Andrew Rain being out because of contact tracing. I don't know that that's been necessarily confirmed by Riley or anyone inside the Oklahoma football program, but I think he is one of the kids that is unvaccinated on the team. So I think he got, I think he's got some contact tracing there. So look for Robert Conjal to start at center if that is the case. So. Just a few things that I'm looking for early on the offensive side of the ball, and then we'll talk through. We'll talk through some of your questions and comments and concerns here. Jimmy, if you missed it, I think a few weeks is what I heard. I've heard 3 weeks. I think that's hopefully you get him back by Kansas State. I think that's a realistic expectation here. I don't know how much they'll actually need him, early on. I think it's good with the schedule that Oklahoma has with Tulane, Western Carolina, and then Nebraska for the first 3 games of the season. And then you got West Virginia, and then before you go to Kansas State for your first true road game of the season. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see that. So some things that I'm looking for, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, starting with Spencer Rattler. I want to see a guy that's very clean in the pocket, just in terms of, I think last year, towards the end of the year, he did a lot better in protecting the ball. He did a lot better in making good decisions. Riley's been a guy that's not extremely he's not extremely quick to give a lot of flattering comments towards his quarterback. He holds them to a very, very high standard, as you would expect at a school like Oklahoma, and what they've been able to produce. And he, in his media availability this week, was talking about they're a little bit more in lockstep, just in terms of what they're trying to do offensively. His decision making is much better than what it was last year. So look for him. And then kind of pocket presence, I think, is interesting as well to see how he is if he gets any pressure. The strength of this Tulane team is not on the defensive side of the ball. They're not bad on the defensive line. I think they're a little bit suspect, and really and truly the weakest part of the team is in the secondary. So look for Oklahoma to have some opportunities in the pass game, down the field with some of those big wide receivers that they have, coming into the season. So that at the quarterback position, interested to see how much Caleb Williams is going to play. I've heard some things that, he may even get some snaps here in the first, second quarter, depending on how that looks. I think that'll be interesting to see. Running back side, I think more for me, I'm not really, yes, I'm excited, but I'm not really concerned. Kennedy Brooks, Eric Gray, who starts, who doesn't. I think they'll both get about equal numbers of snaps. But I think the one thing that I'm very interested in is Riley was glowing, and don't know how much of that's coach speak and how much of how much of that is reality. But I think just looking at that. looking at Jaden Knowles, looking at Todd Hudson, if they play in this game, which I would expect, specifically Jaden Knowles, Riley said that they felt that those two kids, but particularly Jaden Knowles, was going to get to play a lot, whether or not the issue happened with Trey Bradford. So I think that's, for me, that's encouraging just to see once he gets in the game, especially if he gets in the game early with the game still in doubt. I think that'll be interesting to see. Is he a guy that's just going to be able to give them some carries and not really be as effective, or is he a guy that looks the part and is able to play in crucial situations for Oklahoma this year? So that's interesting as well. And I think lastly, the offensive line has been, a big question mark. I think they're very. I think number one, I'm interested to see who starts at the tackle position. I think they're fairly set at the guard spot with with Chris Murray, who's just played incredibly well, and Marquise Hayes. Both of those kids have played extremely well in fall camp. Tyrese Robinson has moved over to the right tackle. I'm not sure if that he was forced over there just because of how good Chris Murray was, or it's a great value add for the team overall. So left tackle will be interesting. Looking at the depth chart, you got Anton Harrison there with probably either Eric Swinson or Wanye Morris backing him up. I think they feel good about their four tackles that they're going to play in and out in this game. So just how good they are early on. We know, watching last year early on, Oklahoma struggled to run the football. So can they exude that dominance early on? So I think that's really big to see on the offensive side of the ball. So get your comments and questions here. Who are you excited about seeing offensively here early? What are some things that you want to see Oklahoma do on the offensive side of the ball early on? And then we'll go through all of your questions and comments here that you have, and then we'll and obviously display anything that you're thinking about on the offensive side, whether it be questions or any comments, or just things that you're wanting to see as this game unfolds. So Ryan, so good question. The depth, yeah. So I think that's a good comment, Ryan. Just in terms of the heat early on, I think Oklahoma certainly, and I think Tulane for that matter, is certainly used to that. Given how hot it's been, it's extremely hot in New Orleans as well. So I think Oklahoma will be ready. Obviously, it's a little bit different getting in and out there. So I think that kind of speaks to the depth that Oklahoma has, and just some things that I've heard, and I think that it'll show that Oklahoma has more depth at all positions than they have, and maybe running back is a little bit outside of that. But other than running back now, I think Oklahoma has more depth all across the board than they've had in a long time, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, but it just looks different. So I think they have the opportunity, as Ryan, as you mentioned, to move guys in and out. I think they've got four running backs that they're probably going to play. They've probably got, I would say, anywhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 8, maybe even 9 offensive linemen that they'll probably play throughout this game. And then they've got, I think, probably 6 or 8 receivers that they'll be able to flush in and out. And then you've got the three or four guys at the tight end H-back position. So I think they'll, really right now focusing on the offensive side of the ball, I think they'll be able to, move those guys in and out a lot to keep them fresh, for no other reason, Ryan, to your point about being hot today and just being able to move those guys around a lot. So good thought there. So Jimmy, I've heard that earlier on. I don't know that he's dinged up in terms of anything that would be significant, but I heard he has a little bit of bumps and bruises, kind of later in camp. So Oklahoma was really careful with him, Jimmy, just kind of not letting him play a lot in some of the scrimmage and some of the live action that they've had, and this was as of the scrimmage, the last scrimmage, which is now about a week and a half old, Jimmy. So I don't think it's anything to be concerned with, but I think it was a great situation from what I've heard. It allowed some of those younger kids to come in, and they just keep on proving themselves on the interior defensive line, and certainly we'll get to that as we go through. But yeah, I don't think that's anything to be concerned about, Jimmy, in terms of what he's looking at and how dinged up maybe he is. So no concerns, just an opportunity for some other kids to step up and show how good they are. Uh, Colin, thanks for the question. I don't remember seeing you here before, so welcome in. Thanks for joining. Do you think we'll be fine at running back? I feel all this stuff is hurting depth. So the last question, it's absolutely hurting the depth. I think we'll be fine as long as everyone's able to stay healthy. Knock on wood here. Should something happen to Kennedy Brooks, should something happen to Eric Gray, then I think you're in a position where Oklahoma's probably going to have to be a little bit creative in what they do back there. I do think they have some solid options that they could use. If that happens, Riley was asked about this a couple of times today, or not today, this week in his press conference. He was very, very clear about this, that he feels pretty strong, and that's what they're going with on their top four, their four running backs, which is obviously Kennedy Brooks, Eric Gray, Jaden Knowles, and Todd Hudson. However, should they get into a situation where there's some depth, he talked about, wouldn't be surprised to see Oklahoma go in a couple of different directions. I think, one direction that you might see is a Jeremiah Hall. He could get some carries, more particularly, in late in the games or maybe even red zone situations. I think, another guy is a Brian Darby, that was a high school running back that has been moved to wide receiver. The wide receiver room's so deep, don't really think that he's going to get a lot of meaningful playing time there. He could be a guy that they move over. And Riley mentioned a couple of other guys in the wide receiver room that really had some of those skills. So I think those are the guys that you'll see immediately. I know that Billy Bowman's been really kind of a trendy thought. I think he's going to be so valuable on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think that's a lever that Riley will pull unless it's absolutely critical. So it's not ideal, Colin, but I think we'll be fine as long as we don't have anything that's significant from an injury perspective to take in. Badger and Bournemouth fan. Thanks for joining again. Another new one that I don't remember this handle. So thanks for the comments here. Great. I appreciate your comments. I pride myself on being not only covering Oklahoma from a firsthand perspective, but having the pulse of the entire college football. So I appreciate the comments, and thanks for the question. Who's going to carry the ball the most for OU? And I think it's really going to be, even more so now, I think it's going to be almost a 50-50 carry distribution perspective for Kennedy Brooks and Eric Gray. I wouldn't be surprised to see Eric Gray come out initially as your starter, but certainly think that those carries are going to be evenly distributed. I think they both have unique skill sets that they bring to the table. That maybe one is a little bit better than the other. I think when you look at Eric Gray is a kid that's a little bit more elusive in the open field in terms of being able to make people miss. I think he's a little bit better in the pass game than Kennedy Brooks, whereas you've got Kennedy Brooks who's probably a little bit better in terms of his vision, being able to see the whole early, and a guy that maybe knows the offense maybe a little bit better than what Eric Gray does. And I think, Kennedy Brooks has a nose for the end zone. I think when all is said and done this season, I think we'll see. There was a question on Twitter that I saw a couple of days ago, which kind of asked some Sooner fans too, and people that cover Oklahoma to, who's going to be the leading rusher and who's going to have the most rushing touchdowns. So I think we'll see. I think Eric Gray will have the most rushing yards. However, I do think that we'll see Kennedy Brooks have more touchdowns. I think he has a nose for the end zone that certainly won't go away. And those that were a little bit nervous with how he performed in the spring certainly was rusty. I think I think he's a guy that has played. He's back to the normal. The normal guy that we've become accustomed to, that was back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher for Oklahoma over the last couple of years prior to 2020. So yeah, thanks for the comment there. That's how I see that shaking out from a running back distribution perspective as well. So Clint, I see your question here on the defensive side. I'm going to hold that one until we kind of start moving over to the defensive side of the ball, and then we'll talk through that at a little bit more depth as well. Ryan, again, interested to see what the walk-ons can do. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that's one of the most intriguing things for me to look at, especially if Oklahoma is handling this game in a way that we all think that they should. I think it's key to get them some carries early on while the game is actually still in question. But then furthermore, when they get down, a little bit later in the game where hopefully the game's more more solidified, more definitely, played out there. If does he look like a guy that can be a guy should something happen to the top two guys, or is Todd Hudson or Jaden Knowles guys that can actually play? Can they play at a high level for a team that's really championship or bust? So that's one of the things that I'm very interested in on the offensive side of the ball. I wouldn't expect us to struggle in a large degree. If we struggle offensively, I think that's depending on how that happens. I think that's a little bit of a warning sign. Now, I don't necessarily say struggling is not scoring 70 points or anything like that, but I think if we have trouble moving the ball, especially early on in the game, I think that's something to keep an eye on as we recap this game later on this afternoon, I should say. I think overall, Ryan, we've got to a point where it's very similar with Lincoln Riley and on the offensive side of the ball. I'm gonna trust them until there's a reason not to trust them. I think Beanbo was very clear early on that he felt like this was the best in terms of fall camp. He feels like this is his best offensive line that he's had since probably 2017, and that was a really good offensive line. 2018. That was a really good offensive line. So I think if they're able to come along like that, and certainly it's not going to be a finished product early on, right? I mean, this offensive line that we see today is not going to be as good as the offensive line that we see, let's say, by Texas. So I think there's going to be some filling out process for Beatonbow. Like I said, I think they've got about probably 8 or 9 kids that they'll play, rotate in pretty regularly today, and just see what the best lineup looks like together, how they play, when the lights are on, as it were, and just see what that looks like as the best. But I think they'll find what that combination looks like pretty early on in the season. And they've got a few games to get there, specifically the first 2 games. But I think that's going to be big, just in terms of just trusting what Beanbo will find a lineup that works good, and they will and they'll be humming at some point during midseason, I think, and that's typical for offensive lines. They take a little bit more time to gel maybe than some others as well. Austin Stogner's a guy who I didn't mention, but yeah, see how healthy he is. I think that's big for this team. He was Rattler's security blanket to a certain extent, and you could see it took when he was out, it took him a little bit just to just to have the same trust and the same faith in some of those kids. So Austin Stogner is very interesting. I've heard Braden Willis is a guy who's finally completely healthy so far. He's had a completely healthy fall camp and spring as well. And so I think he's a guy to look for. And I think he's a guy that a lot of people have said has had one of the more impressive camps for Oklahoma. He changed that jersey number to 9. So if you're a tight end type and you're in the single digits, and you gotta go, you gotta make that happen. So I think him there as well will be interesting. And another guy that I'll be interested to see how much he plays at all is a Jackson Sumlin. So I think he played a lot in the spring game, as you guys would remember. And some of that certainly was out of some of the guys that weren't playing, as much. But I think it'll be interesting to see if he gets some time, and then certainly Jeremiah Hall there at the H-back spot as well. Yeah, Hazelwood's he's a guy that's going to have a really, really big year for Oklahoma and for himself. I've said this several times, and I think this is a money season for for Hazelwood, who's a guy that was extremely highly recruited, one of the highest recruited wide receivers ever to come to Oklahoma, and he's not really been able to put it all together. Some because of injury, and some just because of just not playing up to what he would, I think, tell you his expectation level is. So I heard a lot of good things about him in the fall. He was very similar to a Kennedy Brooks for a different reason. Wasn't completely trusting in that knee, I think, early on in the spring camp. But I think he's got the brace off. He's moving much better. He's much more fluid. I think he's gotten a lot more confidence. So yeah, he's big as well. And they've got I think, interested to look at the wide receivers, especially the guys that we think, I think on paper are going to be really good, but we've not seen them put it together. Either they've not put it together, or we've just not seen them in a game situation. Mario Williams is a guy, Jaden Hazelwood is a guy. When you think we know what to expect from a Marvin Mims. Mike Woods is another guy who's done it in Arkansas, but he hasn't done it here. Very interested to see him with much more talent around him than he's had in the past. In terms of quarterback play, just a lot of weapons around him. He's a guy that I think could have a breakout year for Oklahoma. He's one of the guys that I've predicted to have the most receiving yards of any of the wide receivers this year. And this is not a slight to Marvin Mims or anything like that. I think they'll maybe spread the wealth a little bit more in terms of what that looks like. But yeah, I think a guy like Mike Woods is certainly a guy that'll get some playing time, and obviously he'll get some playing time. But I think he could be just a huge factor for Oklahoma, just from his size. As big as he is, you could almost be confuse him for maybe a smallest linebacker out there. So I think that'll be interesting to see, because I think he's got the ability to go over the middle. I think he can can body some DBs. Or safeties or whoever's covering him, to make some of those tough catches. And I think he's got the speed to beat you deep. So I think brings a lot to the table that could be big for Oklahoma. That's got a lot of weapons, I think, but it's a lot of unproven weapons that I'm really excited just to watch them play today, just to see where they're at. So good thought. So yeah, thanks for the confirmation there. But really big game, if you're a channel surfer, Penn State and Wisconsin at 11 a.m. at the same time as Oklahoma and Tulane. So when Oklahoma's on the commercial, that's another really good game to catch, at the same time. So Badger and Bournemouth fan, thank you for the comment. Now let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. And I think historically we've been accustomed over the last 5 years or so, maybe even longer than that, to just be defense is just something that Oklahoma has to do, and just maybe get enough stops to keep their offense, just to keep Oklahoma in the game. So I think that narrative obviously has changed over the last 3 years with Alex Grinch. He did a really good job the first year in getting them from one of the worst defenses in the country, and statistically, you could consider specifically on the pass defensive side, one of the worst. And then, all the way to last year, Oklahoma came up to 29th overall in defense, and that improvement, that same level of improvement is going to be needed and expected, this year for Oklahoma on the defensive side. And I think they've got the roster that they've never had before, and I never had before, basically from my perspective, since I think you can make an argument this could be on paper the best defense that Oklahoma has had since the 2004 season. 2008, 2009, definitely, but I think that team could eclipse that and certainly be the best defense that Oklahoma's had since the 2004 season. I believe that team gave up about right around 19 to 20 points per game. So I think if Oklahoma can be in the 17 to 20 points per game this year in terms of average, I think they will certainly have themselves set up for a championship run, which is it. Everyone knows, and I think maybe this year more than any in a long time, it is definitely championship or bust for Oklahoma this year. I mean, I think it's a lot of pressure to certainly put on these kids, but I think they welcome it, and I think they know um, that it really is a championship or bust season. If it's kind of at the very least winning a playoff game, it kind of comes into the category of not now then when situation for Oklahoma. So, looking at that, Alex Grinch had his media availability this week, and he said this early on in the fall, and he's not wavered on this really one bit, guys, and just talking about how many guys that they're going to shuffle in and out of the lineup. Here from a depth perspective. So starting on the defensive line, and let's go through the progression to the linebackers and then the secondary. So the defensive line interior, I fully expect 8 guys to play. He's talked about these guys from the beginning of fall camp and then to game week this week. He talked about he talked about how good that those guys are playing, how much effort they're bringing in, and at a high level in practice that he's going to play them. So, not sure, not sure who's going to start. Obviously, you've got Perrion Winfrey starting, I believe, but then you've got potentially Josh Ellison on the opposite side. Then you've got Isaiah Coe, you've got Corey Roberson, you've got Laron Stokes, you've got Jalen Redmond. So you've got a lot of kids. You've got Kelvin Gilliam as a new guy. Not sure how much he'll get to play, but if he'll factor into it. But so I think they'll play about 8 defensive tackle through the course of the game. And then when you look at the defensive end, he mentioned that, there's probably 3 that they'll play there, at that defensive end position. Certainly Isaiah Thomas is the leader, is going to be the number 1 guy, but have heard tons of good things about Reggie Grimes as well coming on. Kind of later in camp. Ethan Downs is a guy that's played very well through the beginning of coming in the spring, played well there. So I think he'll get some playing time as well. Not sure how much on him. I think Reggie Grimes and obviously, Isaiah Thomas will be your star, but Reggie Grimes will get a lot of playing time. Not sure how much Ethan Downs will factor into it, but he'll be there. And then when you look at the rush backer side, obviously Nick Benito. I've heard some things about Nick Benito that he's taken, an incredible step from last year, into this year, and even. And an argument could be made from what I've heard that he might be the best player on the team, not the defense, not the linebacker, but the team. So I think that'll be interesting to see how impressive that he is. So I think you'll see him. I could see 4 guys honestly at rush backer playing a little bit this year, specifically today. So you've got Nick Benito, and then you've got Marcus Stripling there. Along with Caleb Kelly, who has moved. He's played a little bit at the Mike and the Will, historically for Oklahoma, and he's moved over he's really kind of found a home there at the rush backer position. So I think he'll play some. And then you got Clayton Smith, the freshman, who is probably the highest recruited defensive guy that they had coming in this year. So could definitely see him as a guy that plays today. But I think as the year goes on, I think he'll get even more and more playing time, really at that position, for Oklahoma. Then you look at the Mike and the Will, and you've got, I think you've got David Agwebu and Brian Asamoah that will be there as your starters. I think Deshaun White will back up both of those guys a little bit, maybe be a little bit of the swing guy. Danny Stutsman is going to play. I think he'll probably be one of the second guys there. So, and then you got a guy named Shane Witter. See how much will he get on the field. So really just extremely exciting to see where Oklahoma is at from a defensive perspective. I think they've just got a lot of depth at the backer position. And then as you move into the secondary, and I say this is one of the things that I'm most excited to just see is looking at the corners, and I think hearing Alex Grinch talk, and I think going into the weeds just a little bit on that, guys, with him. I think I wouldn't say concerned is the right word. I think he's just looking for consistency. So I think of any position on the defense, that's the most interested I am in just seeing what are some of these guys that can be the most consistent, make those plays. I think from a starting perspective, I think we're likely to see DJ Graham and Woody Washington, start those two corner positions. But I think you've got some guys on their heels. You've got Jaden Davis there. You've got let's see, who else do you got? You've got Latrell McCutcheon, there as well. And so I think you've got a lot of depth there. I think there's probably about 4 or 5 guys. Justin Harrington's another guy that we'll see. So I think you got about 4 or 5 guys, and I think it'll be one of those things. Who's the most consistent that will consistently get to play more often than not there for Oklahoma in the secondary, specifically at the corner spot. The safeties is pretty solidified in terms of who Oklahoma has had in the past. You've got De'Aaron Turner-Yell, and you've got Pat Fields that are going to be your 2 starters. I think we'll see Key Lawrence in there a lot at the safety position. We'll see a name that was a little bit surprising to me that I'd kind of thought had gotten lost in the shuffle to a certain extent. Was a Justin Broyles, and Grinch had talked about how much of a jump that he's taken this year in spring and even in fall. That he hasn't taken. A lot of kids from a senior year don't really take that step, but he's really taken that step. So I think we'll see him play a lot. Not sure what that means for a guy like Bryson Washington, who I thought probably would be a backup, but maybe it looks like he's more, he might be more suited for kind of like the third team rep from a safety perspective. I think you see probably about 3 or 4 guys that they're maybe not as comfortable with their depth at the safety position, maybe as some other ones. So I think you've got 4 guys that will play pretty consistently there, and then the nickelback, and I think that's very interesting. One of the most exciting guys that you could see is Billy Bowman as a true freshman. Grinch wasn't really didn't really show his cards, show his hand, so to speak, and who will play. I think both or who will start, I should say. I think Jeremiah Cradell and Billy Bowman will both play a lot. I don't know who will start, but I think both those kids will see the field an awful lot, and they're both new in terms of big time playing time. I think obviously Billy Bowman as a true freshman is new, but then when you look at Jeremiah Cradell, he was in the rotation a little bit more later in the year, but didn't play a ton. And Grinch asks his nickel guys to do a lot of things. They ask him to play up on the line of scrimmage, maybe rush the passer a little bit. Sometimes you have to play a wide receiver. Sometimes you'll have to play a tight end. You've got to be able to tackle in open space a lot. So I think there's a lot that Oklahoma and Alex Grinch specifically looks for in that. So I think that'll be interesting. And then kind of the specialists, I think Oklahoma has a chance to have the best special teams in the country. And I think it could be easily the best special teams in the country. You've got 2, just incredible weapons at the punter and the place kicker position with Michael Turk and with Gabe Burkich. I think Gabe Burkich is obviously a known commodity here. A couple years ago, he was perfect in field goals and extra points. He was still really solid. He missed a few. I think he was certainly the Texas game when he shanked that one in overtime a little bit was the most notable, but he was still very consistent just in terms of thinking only missed like 5 kicks on the year. So really, and then when you look at Michael Turk, I think a lot was made out of him coming to Oklahoma, just in terms of is he going to be good enough to play early on, and caught some stuff with Dusty Dvorak earlier this week, and they talked a lot about talked some about special teams, and they asked point blank to Riley, who's going to be your starting punter, and Riley kind of laughed, and then he said it's definitely going to be Turk. So I think looking at him, he averaged 47 yards per punt last year for Arizona State. So I think this is certainly one of the best punters in the country, and a guy that Oklahoma, if they have to punt, they will throughout the course of the season. I think you should expect anywhere from about 25 to 35 punts through the course of the season. I think that's about 3 per game. So I think you'll see that. I think for Oklahoma. But then when you look at the punt return game, you've got Marvin Mims, who is really explosive. They've been, they were a little bit better in the punt return game last year. I think that, a lot of that has to do with, where the position is on the field, obviously, in terms of where you're getting that punt. But if they have the opportunity to get some returns, I think you like that. And then I think you're pretty solidified with Mario Williams and Billy Bowman, two just extremely new kids. Obviously, it's kind of ironic to see 2 kids that have never seen the field at Oklahoma be your starting kickoff returners. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see. I think they're both very dynamic with the ball in their hands, but something you don't really see a whole lot is 2 true freshmen coming in and playing on the kickoff. So I think it just shows to the trust that Oklahoma has and that Riley has in those 2 kids, to make plays. And then I think you look at how explosive they can be. So I think that will be so. I think Oklahoma has the opportunity to be one of the best, have one of the best special teams in the country. So we'll take some of your questions and comments here. So if you haven't talked, input some of your comments, any questions, make sure you get here on the defense or the special teams, and then we'll move into more of kind of the predictions side of things before we exit here around 10 o'clock this morning. So and we'll go as long as you guys. We've got about 50 on the line here. So thanks for joining us early this morning. Make sure you join us later, and we'll have more. I think there'll be much more to talk about. It's still talking season for about an hour and 17 more minutes, and then we have and then we actually have game to talk about. So there's a lot that we'll break down afterwards as well. So thanks for coming in. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, hit the like, subscribe button, and I'll put some sort of a notification out, maybe 5-10 minutes before we'll go live after the game. But we will, do the same thing here, and we'll take your questions. I'll kind of run through some of my initial thoughts, and then get your thoughts and comments on the line, and anything that you guys want. You guys make the show, so make sure you tell people to come join us, and we'll talk some. I think we're going to call this Boomer Breakdown. So our post game show is going to be called Boomer Breakdown, and we'll break down every facet of this, not only this game but every game throughout the season. Will NRK, I'm sorry, Jimmy, get some playing time? I think it's interesting. So they talked a little bit about him, and he's a guy that I don't really think that will get a ton of playing time early. I think they talked about him. He's a kid that he's got all kinds of potential, all kinds loaded with athleticism, but I don't know that he's a kid that's going to play a ton early on, just because he's so incredibly raw. I think Calvin Thibodeau talked a little bit, and Jamar Cain talked a little bit about him in terms of they take a step back with him, and not really necessarily because he's not good, but I think there's just some technique things that they have to teach him that they don't necessarily have to tell some of these other kids that have played football their entire life. So I think he's a kid that once he gets more confidence, once he gets more playing time, he gets more reps and understands the game, I think a little bit more, I think he'll get more playing time. But certainly I think they'll try to get him in 4 games this year just to get him some in some mop up duty situation. But I think he's not going to be, a regular contributor, or at least early on, Jimmy. Ryan, will Danny Stutsman be a difference maker? I'm very, very interested to watch him. Me and my dad here watching the game. We talked last night about who's a handful of guys that you're excited to watch on both sides of the ball, and for both of us, Stutzman was one of the guys. And you take it with a grain of salt, to a certain extent, what you hear, in terms of preseason camp and stuff like that, in terms of guys that are impressive. But Stutzman is a guy, since the time that he came on campus, is a guy that you consistently hear rave reviews about. And I think a lot of people saw him in the summer workouts on how competitive he is in terms of winning some of those races, being one of the best guys in the weight room. I think it started there, and then it kind of manifested itself early on in fall practice, and then I think there was some hesitancy, number one, because it was just so good. But I think the hesitancy was really just in terms of, okay, he's impressive now, but it's a lot of 7-on-7. It's a lot of individual situational type stuff. What happens when the playbook opens up a little bit more? What happens when they get into scrimmage situations? And I've heard nothing to deter that fact that he's going to be a player for Oklahoma. I think he'll probably be the second or third guy in the middle of that linebacker room. So right now, I think so. I'm very interested to see how much a difference maker that he could be on the field. And it was a guy that could be. We always say this: a young guy that maybe by Texas has solidified himself as potentially even a starter. I wouldn't completely be surprised about that. Obviously, he's got two really seasoned and great guys in front of him, and David Ogwebu and Brian Asamoah. But I think he could see the field at any one of those spots, and I think the proof's in the pudding, just to see exactly how how well he plays early on to get some playing time and get a lot of playing time early. Hey, it's just time. It's just me time. Sorry. I appreciate the shout out. Good morning, everybody. It's a great morning. It's exciting. I think, me personally, I know everyone doesn't love 11 a.m. games. Watching them on TV. I love the 11 a.m. games, so you don't have to wait all day around for Oklahoma to kick off. So yeah, definitely. So starting to see a couple of predictions come in. 58-7 Oklahoma. I think that would be, if Oklahoma holds Tulane to 7 points, I think that would be very impressive. Looking at this game, Tulane has a pretty solid offense. They average about 34 points per game. They do have a new offensive coordinator in Chip Long. However, looking at them, they run more of a spread option offense. They led the AAC in rushing, one of the best rushing teams in the country overall a year ago. So I think that it'll be in some of the things that they do. Michael Pratt was a true freshman, inserted in, I think, game 3 last year, led freshman in touchdown passes with 20 touchdowns and eight interceptions. And so I think he'll provide a little bit of a challenge for Oklahoma, and I think offensively they will provide more of a challenge to Oklahoma, I think, than obviously Western Carolina, but maybe even Nebraska as well. So I think it's a good test for Oklahoma's new, improved, revamped defense early on throughout this game, to see how well they play and how well they adjust. That certainly they've had the entire offseason to really prepare for for this kind of offense. So So yeah, I think that's something to look for, and I think Tulane will be a little bit better than what you would think on the offensive side of the ball. Especially, like I said, they averaged almost excuse me, almost 35 points per game a year ago. So I think that will be so interesting to watch. Looking for a lot of assignment sound football from Oklahoma. Tackling in open space is going to be big, and then looking for no busts. Oklahoma hasn't had a lot of busts in the secondary under Grinch, but certainly would like that to remain the same as well. Why are they playing so early? So I think contrary to what people think, the universities don't have, specifically Oklahoma in this case, they don't have any control over what time the game is played. So that's up to the network. So ESPN, obviously, well, ABC specifically, but ESPN has the media rights for this game, and so they're playing it at 11 a.m. Not really surprised, honestly, for this game to be at 11 a.m. given the fact that you have Miami and Alabama at the 2:30 slot, and then obviously Clemson and Georgia at the 6:30 slot on the ESPN network. So yeah, I think that's the reason why. And next week you've got Western Carolina, obviously on pay-per-view, but it's a 6 p.m. Kick, and then obviously Nebraska is much very well documented that it's at 11 a.m. kickoff as well. So we've got some rooster kickoffs to start the season here, unfortunately. Unfortunately for those of you that's watched that are going to the games or attending the games, but like I said, those of us that watch on TV at our home, I think we love the games. At least I do. That are early. And at the very least, I love the games that are spread out. If you're like me, I'm a huge college football fan of college football in general. So I think having those games spread out where you don't have a whole lot of great games at the same time is really just beneficial for the sport as well. So Caleb, good question. Has the nickel starter been announced yet? So no, I think what Alex Grinch had talked about is they would solidify what that starting lineup looks like on Friday. So yesterday he said that earlier in the week. So I think Oklahoma. It obviously is Credell. Or Bowman. I don't really have a good feel. I think right now to see who that is. Like I said, both of them will play 50-50. If I had to if I had to bet, if I had to lay some money, I think I would probably see Bowman going out there just because of the most depth that he has. I think the more upside that he has, just from that perspective, and I think he's got more reps early on in camp with Cordell, being out as well. So thanks for that question. Jeremiah Dorsett, easy win for us Oklahoma fans. I sure hope so. If this is a struggle, then I think maybe some of the goals aren't what we thought they would be coming into that season, or coming into this season. So if they have to struggle with with Tulane, I think that's not a great look for Oklahoma this year. So welcome, William Lorraine from Thailand. Love to see viewers all across the country. So thanks for coming in and watching us and hanging out with us this morning. Appreciate you. Okay, it's just me time. Sorry, it's a little bit of a tongue twister, my friend. It's early. It's kind of early in the morning, so sorry. I got it now. Don't change your handle. I've got it. It's just me time. Sorry about that. So feel free to keep that. Don't change it. Don't change it at all as well. So I think that's fine. I've got it now. Nobody likes big sunrise kickoffs. You're alone in that, aside from Fox executives. I mean, it's just me. Like, obviously to each their own. The 11 a.m. I don't. I'm going to be up watching football no matter what. So I know the atmosphere is better at night. Certainly, I can agree with that. But it's. But I'm going to be up watching football at 11 a.m. So I might as well be watching Oklahoma if I'm watching football all day long early on. And I think something that, and we'll talk about this next week, but next week there's actually a 10 a.m. kickoff and two 10:30 a.m. kickoffs. Um, so the people that don't like rooster kickoffs, it's going to be even more so next week for college football. Anyone else? I think watch is what you're looking for. Web secure the UNC game. Me too. I had North Carolina in given 5.5. I picked them as well. I think that was surprising to me. Not necessarily to see them struggle, but to see them struggle for the totality of the game. I think was surprising. Offensively specifically, to only score 10 points was, if you had told me that they would have held, if they would have held, let's see, if they would have held Virginia Tech, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. If they would have held Virginia Tech to 17 points, I would have said that, they cover that game, they cover that 5.5 easily. But offensive line struggled. They had trouble throwing the football, which was, a little bit surprising with a guy like Sam Howell, but not necessarily completely surprising given the fact that they have a lot of newness at the wide receiver position. But one of the things that I took away from it was their offensive line was just horrible in that game, and Sam Howell was running for his life, and it's a little bit surprising because they returned all 5 starters from a year ago. So you wonder if it's Virginia Tech being a lot better, or if it's North Carolina not being quite as good on that offensive line as we had anticipated them being. So I think that's something to watch out for. And for Spencer Rattler specifically, from a Heisman, on the Heisman thing, I think you look at that, and you look at Oklahoma versus North Carolina, and Rattler was really kind of toe to toe with Sam Howell from a Heisman perspective at the quarterback position. So I think if Rattler has a really good game, he takes a pretty substantial lead early on, and certainly you got DJ Uwangalele as well, and you've got maybe a who else would be in the mix there? You got the Bryce Kidd from Alabama. You've got JT Daniels if he has a great game, as well, who could be in the mix. But yeah, if Bryce Young, Alabama as well. I'd forgotten his last name for a second there, so my apologies. But yeah, I think Oklahoma or Rattler has a good. Not that that's the end goal for anyone, but I think. That's kind of interesting to see if Rattler can kind of take that next step early on as well. The Truth, thanks for joining. I know you've been with us a couple of times. Thanks, man. I appreciate the question. How do you think our offense will operate in short yardage situations with us not having a bigger back? And I think that's really a question. Honestly, that's a really good question that I have. They don't have that. They don't have that big back, the guy that they could lean on. I think Oklahoma in the past has had a guy like Samaje Perine. They've had even Ramondre Stevenson last year. They've had that guy, Trey Sermon, is a guy that really leaned on people. They don't have that guy. So I think that's going to be interesting situation to see how that plays out. Maybe not necessarily right now, early on, but as they get into conference season, and when the games get a little bit tougher, when they have short yardage or goal to go situations, who is that guy? Do they feel like that they need Jeremiah Hall to get some of those tough yards, or is Eric Gray and Kenny Brooks and Jaden Knowles to that extent effective enough? So I think that's going to be something to watch for. And a really good question. I don't know how they how they're going to go through that. So that'll be fun to watch as well. So Jimmy with a question here: How much will Caleb Williams play? I think he'll play a lot today. I think obviously score and situation are a big determining factor, but I think he will play a lot. They're going to. I think certainly. I don't know when you think about burning his red shirt, what that even really means anymore. But I think that I mean, at a very minimum, he'll play a lot. Excuse me, in these 4 games early on. Absolutely, these first 2, without a doubt. I've heard some thoughts that he might even play early in the as early in the second quarter, I should say. Today. So I think it would have to. I think I would like it for it to be a situation where Oklahoma has the game, fairly well handled. They've got a comfortable. They've got a 14, 21 point lead in the second quarter. Wouldn't feel terribly bad to see him get a series here just to see what he looks like in somewhat of a competitive game. But yeah, I think he'll certainly play early and often. Duck rain I'm sure I butchered that. So we've got Thailand and Canada this morning. So great to see all across the globe. We've got people that are loving Oklahoma football. So thanks for joining. Mario Williams and Billy Bowman, 2 of the guys that I'm most excited to see as well. So definitely excited to see that as well. So web security. So thoughts on the Big 12 expansion being more than just a rumor. So while I'm talking through this, so we'll get to more of the prediction side of things as well. So you guys in the comments, give me your predictions. What you got for a score prediction? How many touchdowns do you see Rattler throwing? Who's our leading receiver? Who's our leading rusher? Give me your predictions now. So as we go through this, and we'll display them, then I'll end up giving my predictions as well. So my thoughts on the Big 12 expansion. So I think it's more than just a rumor. It almost sounds like right now it's a foregone conclusion. And for those that haven't been keeping up, it looks like the Big 12 will be extending invitations maybe as early as next week after the application for admittance from it's going to be Cincinnati, UCF. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank here. Houston and Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and there's one more. I'll have to look there. There's 4 of them. I'm missing one here, so my apologies. Web security. Gosh, who is the other one? Sorry, it's driving me crazy here. So yeah, I've heard that's going to happen. I think maybe as early as Friday of next week. Yeah, Lewis, thanks. BYU, sorry, BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston are the 4 teams. So yeah, so I think that's going to happen. They even mentioned as early as 2023, they could be playing in the Big 12. So I don't expect Oklahoma to be around then. The more and more, I thought this originally, but I think Oklahoma and Texas are in the SEC next year. I think worst case, they are in the SEC by the time 2023 season starts. But I don't see any, if they have the money, they have the ability. I don't see any reason for Oklahoma to not in Texas to stick around the Big 12 any longer than they need to. So I think when you look at that, I think at the very least it solidifies the Big 12 as remaining a conference and still staying viable. I don't know. I still don't think they're at the same. They're obviously not going to be at the same level as the SEC or the ACC, the Big Ten, or even the Pac-12. But I think it's enough to keep them around as a P5 as well. So couple of things of note that that I'm seeing here early on, and it looks like, and this is credit from Gabe Eichert on Twitter. It looks like the starting lineup in terms of the offensive line is going to be your Anton Harrison at left tackle, Marquise Hayes at left guard, Robert Conjal at center, Chris Murray at right guard, and Tyrese Robinson at right tackle. Pretty much what we thought. What I thought coming in. I thought the left tackle could be either Harrison or Wanya Morris. And I think the center could have been Robert Conjal or or Andrew Rame. I think the one thing that's going to be interesting, just to make sure from a center position, if Andrew Rame is in contract tracing and he's not going to be available for this game, then obviously I think it's having Conjul at the center position is strong and is what you would expect. Having said that, if he's playing and Robert Conjul has just won the job, I think that's a different situation to talk through. I don't know if I don't know if that's area of concern for Oklahoma, because I had thought early on in fall camp that Andrew Rame had pretty much just won this job, but then I'd heard some things later on, and I don't know if this is just Conjul getting that much better, or if it was Andrew Rame really struggling, or what it was. But Conjul had been playing a ton more, so I think I think that will be interesting to see on what that competition at the center position looks like as well. So how can Tulane pull the upset? So anytime you're a 31 point underdog in a game like this, you have to have a lot of breaks go your way. So I kind of look at the way Oklahoma played against Kansas State. Spencer Rattler threw 3 interceptions in that game, so they're going to need turnovers. I think in order for Tulane to be competitive in this game, go into the fourth quarter from their perspective, I think they have to be at least +3, anywhere from +3 to +5 in the turnover game. I think they have to have the ability to stop the run to make Oklahoma one-dimensional. And I think whether it's some trick plays or misdirection on offense, I think offensively you need you need to put Oklahoma's defense into some situation where they're not not comfortable with on the defensive side of the ball. So I think those are a couple of the things that you look for. And you just look for Oklahoma to have an off game, not tackling well on defense, maybe some busts, some things like that. So that's how I think Oklahoma or how Tulane can stay in the game and potentially get an upset. But that's much easier said than done. Yeah, 2.0. I was thinking about that a little bit when the Truth had that question about short yardage situations. Caleb Williams is obviously a much better runner than Spencer Rattler. He's not as well put together, but you're interested to see if there's some packages that they have some packages they have for him. For Caleb Williams there at the quarterback, whether it's short yardage or whatever it is specifically is there. So we'll get into some of the predictions here. So Jimmy 47-17, just a little bit under the under the point spread, but a 30-point win. I think Oklahoma would be happy with that. 17 points is a little bit on the top, I think, for me in terms of being happy with what Oklahoma has done defensively in that game. So I think it depends on how the 17 points are scored, obviously. But if Oklahoma gives up more than 17, a little bit of a disappointment here early on for the Sooners on the defensive side of the ball. William Lorraine 48-14. Mims or Woods top receiver. I think that's a good thought. 48-14, another solid win, solid score prediction for Oklahoma there. 42-17 from Ryan. Okay, that's a good one as well. 52-17. That's kind of in the line of what I was thinking in the general area when I'll give my prediction here in just a few minutes. But yeah, 52-17. That's in the line that I was thinking as well. 42-17. The transfers lead rushing and receiving categories. Gray and Woods, solid. Solid prediction there, Ryan. Yoshimitsu, thanks for joining. I think this is the first time I've seen you here, so thanks for joining. 61-3 win. That would be an incredibly impressive performance from Oklahoma. in this game if they were able to hold Tulane to 3 points. I think that would be a kind of eye-opening performance from across the country that fans would, not only Oklahoma fans but just everyone across the country. And then Chad Brewster, 77-0. I mean, that's on a different level. I think Oklahoma might get some votes might get a lot of play for being the number one team in the country. Surpassing Alabama if they were able to do that. So in terms of my predictions, I've got Oklahoma winning 49-13. I think Oklahoma is able to move the ball fairly consistently on the offensive side of the ball, and then defensively, I think they play well. Tulane gets a few plays here and there, but I think Oklahoma is able to hold the Green Wave to just the one touchdown, and then the 2 field goals as well. So 49-13 is what I got for Oklahoma covering the spread, and going on to a comfortable win for the Sooners this year. So a couple more, got 42-10, 66-21 as well. So thanks. So everybody, thanks for joining. We've had upwards of almost 60 people in here, and then right now we've got about 54 people in here, 57 now. So everybody, much appreciate you joining. I'm really excited to have this kind of turnout that we've had early on, and early in the morning for this game. So excited for Oklahoma to kick off. We can finally say it's football time in Oklahoma. After the longest, college football has the longest off season of any team or of any sport that we have to deal with. It's like almost 7-8 month complete off season from the time the final game kicks off until the first game of the season from year to year. So really exciting. So anyways, make sure all of you guys come back. We'll have some in-depth review of what Oklahoma was able to do in this game. What are some of the key takeaways? What are some things that they need to get better at? What's your level of excitement after this game in terms of do we feel Oklahoma can win a national championship this year? Do we think it's still Big 12? What are some overreactions? I think there's a lot of overreactions that come in game after game one, on the good and the bad side. So share, hit that notification bell as well, and make sure you're here. I will post something probably about 15 minutes before we're about to go live. We will what we'll do here is I will pretty soon after the game, almost immediately after the game is over, I'll post on our YouTube channel in the community section. So make sure you're looking out for that. I will post, I will tweet. I'll be tweeting throughout the game. So come follow me at Jason Ray 1. My kind of handle there is the voice of Oklahoma football. So come follow me. Give me a follow. I'll follow you guys back, and we will and I'll tweet up until the game, and then through the game, and then I'll tweet out that we're getting ready to start our post game coverage, and just incredibly excited to get started with you guys this year. So come follow me. Thanks for joining in, and we'll see you guys a little bit after 2:30. Boomer Sooner.